Hi, good day. My name is Shiv, and I've been involved with the MMA for the last 7 years. It's an absolute pleasure to do this session. I'm going to talk about the next decade marketer. And what am I going to cover? Next slide, please. In this presentation, I'm going to cover for you over the next 20 minutes the global middle class. The middle class has a huge impact on the way brands work. I'm going to talk about internet trends. I'm going to talk about online sales as a percentage of total retail sales. And I'm going to give you some thoughts on what I believe future marketers need to do. Next slide, please. The middle class globally will go from current 3.8 billion people in 2020 to about 5.4 billion people in 2030. It was 2.4 billion in 2010. So the middle class is going to grow dramatically. Now, if you look at it, thanks to the pandemic, close to 500 million people have dropped in their earnings level. But notwithstanding that, I think the next 9 years, I think we'll see a catch up as a lot of the economies pick up. Why is middle class important? Middle class is extremely important because they form the median of all consumption. If you look at globally today, there are 500,000 brands globally and in about 2,000 categories. So a growing middle class actually gives rise to more brands and more consumption. That's what I have found. Next slide, please. So if I look at share of global consumption, and I've taken just a few countries here, you look at Russia in 2015 and you look at Russia in 2030. Russia had a 4% contribution to global consumption in 2015. They will drop to 3%. India, on the other hand, will triple. It will go from 5% of global consumption in 2015 to 17% by 2030. Japan will go from 6 to 3. China will grow from 12 to 22. And USA will grow from 13 to 7. Now, here's the catch. This doesn't mean that the absolute consumption level in dollar terms will drop. The absolute consumption levels in Russia, in Japan, and USA will actually increase. But if you look at 2030, you will actually see that 39% of the global consumption is between two countries, which is China and India. And that's very, very significant. Next slide, please. So all retail buying, I want to go back and trace the history of how retail buying evolved. If you look at retail revolution, the revolution number one in retail was what I call the Elizabeth era. What did Elizabeth do at that point of time? They allowed artisans and craftsmen to openly sell their products, goods and services in the open market. So a number of artisans and craftsmen opened small shops, be it a shoe shop, be it a bag shop, be it a clothes shop, whatever it was. They opened small shops so that they could sell directly to the public. Before that, the state would buy and then redistribute to the public. But remember, when you're an artisan or a craftsman, you have a very limited range. So you have a few things which you're trying to sell to consumers. The next revolution in retail actually happened with the factory, the modern day factory and the new production methods. As the modern day factory came into being, we saw more productivity, mass production happening, etc. More retail channels developed. As a result of it, the craftsmen and the artisans who was there before, they had to up their game. They had to become far more innovative. They had to go into a design language. They had to do many more things in order to command a premium over the mass-produced goods. Then revolution number 3 was what I call the world becoming far more global. This happened because a number of governments dropped tariffs and there was free movement of goods, people, and services between one country and the other. As a result, China became the world's factory. And suddenly you saw global retail chains develop. You saw the McDonald's of this world. You saw the Burger Kings of this world. And lots of other brands going across the world. And suddenly people saying, that's my familiar brand. That's my familiar burger. And I can tap into it. Revolution number 4 in retail is happening right now with digital. With digital, it's a one-to-one game. You have a platform, you have an aggregator, you have a brand, you're talking to consumers one-to-one. And each of these people, whether it's a platform or a brand, they have a very broad range to offer. So in between these 4 revolutions, you'll notice that the artisan and the craftsman was a one-to-one situation, limited range, but one-to-one. But here now we have a very broad range going one-to-one. That's the fundamental difference. Next slide, please. So why is this happening? It's happening because there are 3.6 billion smartphones today. On an average, the world sells about 1.2 to 1.4 billion smartphones every year. Some go out, etc., and come back. Now, these 3.6 billion smartphones have an average storage capacity of 600 GB per phone. They log on to about 800 million Wi-Fi networks across the world. Now, if you look at this GB, what is it being used for? A lot of it is being used for storing pictures. A lot of it is being used to store videos, etc. On an average, people share 60% of the pictures they take. It's an image-led world. People are conveying stories through pictures, and I will come back to storytelling later on. Next slide, please. There are 4 billion people today on the internet. It's about 52-53% of the total population. Today, the internet is growing at single digit, anything between 6 and 8%. Okay, growth will stay at that level, I believe, over the next few years. Next slide, please. If you look at online retail sales as a percentage of total retail sales in that country, if you look at 2015, you look at 2020, and you look at 2024, because this is where the data is available. China online sales in 2015 was 15%. In 2020 was 40%. In 2024 will be 58%. Britain in 2015 was the same level as China, 15%. In 2020, it became 31%. And in 2024, it will go to about 29%. In the world, online sales was 8% in 15, about 18% in 2020, and expected to be 21% in 2024. In America, online sales was 8% in 15, 15% in 2020, and expected to be 20. If you look at the pandemic, many stores have closed down in America, many stores have closed down in Britain, and many global chains have closed down. The physical chain is under serious threat. And I personally believe that online will actually flourish in the coming years. If you want to think about online, you want to think about innovation in online, new business models in online, China is going to be the market, no other market. One can learn a lot from China because 58% of total retail sales will be online in China by the year 2024, not far away. Next, whenever we look at online, people have had some misconceptions. Next slide, please. Misconceptions saying that this category will not go online, etc. A number of people have said over a number of years that grocery will not go online. Now, here's the data for you from grocery. Just look at grocery sales in China. There were 14% of total grocery sales online in 2017. That's gone to 28% in 2020. In Britain, it was 7% in 2017. That is grocery sales online as a percentage of total grocery sales. And it's gone to 12% in 2020. In America, it's gone from 4 to about 7.5. So which means it's virtually doubled. So the old notion that the housewife or whoever is buying, the consumer has to go and feel the, lady finger, the tomato, check the thing, etc., does not work anymore. It basically means that people are far more comfortable shopping online, even for things like fruits and vegetables. Once they trust a source, once you have a business model which allows them to return if they are not happy, etc., then the online model will take off for any category that you can think of, not just grocery. So the old notion that there will be some categories which will go online, some categories which will go offline is completely wrong. I think it goes back to the consumer. If the consumer is interested in the change, so should you be. Next slide, please. Now, while online is damn good, etc., consumers are worried. Consumers are worried, and 50% of them are worried about internet privacy. They're saying, I leave my number with you. I tell you all that I'm buying on a regular basis, etc. I might be buying some OTC products with you, whatever it is. So they're really worried about their details being leaked out. So internet privacy is going to be a huge concern for consumers. Next slide, please. On the other hand, thanks to IoT, etc., is biometrics the future is a question we need to ask for the next 10 years. I think you have so many cameras all over the place. Is the digital brother watching you? I think having cameras everywhere actually helps in reducing crime. It actually helps in reducing petty theft. It helps in actually identifying who the culprits are. And I think the US, strike on Capitol Hill is a very good example, where the authorities looked at the cameras and said, hey, these are the people. And with facial recognition, they're able to pinpoint who actually were the perpetrators of the crime. Now, so far is good. But if governments in any society start using facial recognition and tracking you for reasons other than security of the state or reasons other than security of society, then I think consumers will be concerned. So biometrics, I think, will happen, but I think the thinking behind it and how that society will use it, I think is going to be an important question. I don't think anybody has an answer to it because each government will have its own set of principles. For example, when SARS happened many years ago, I think facial recognition and just tracking your temperature in every airport was a fantastic help. Imagine if you're standing in line and this digital tracking was not there, it would have taken us hours to get out of an airport. So there are many good uses of biometric tracking, but there will always be some challenges. And I think governments will have to be sensible in the way they look at it. Next slide, please. So going on from governments, I personally believe that regulation will be big this decade. You already see regulation concerning social media coming up in Australia. You see regulation concerning social media coming up in India. You see regulation concerning media and online in France and Germany. I think almost every country will do that. Because in the past, digital, if you're a digital brand, then lines on a map were mere dotted lines for you. You could just transcend them at the click of a button. In the future, it will no longer be so. I think every government will look at the source and will look at the origin and ask themselves, how can we regulate this? So I would say for all online marketers, for all online brands, for all online people, I think you must get used to regulation. Regulation will be there. I think it's better for you to work with the governments. It's better for you to have self-disclosure. It's better for you to have self-regulation rather than get a bunch of rules thrust down your throat. So I think it will be big. I would say watch out for it. Next slide, please. The future consumer. We've talked a lot about consumers in the past. I've talked about consumers over the last 25 years. We always said the consumer is king or queen, but I think very few brands actually played it out that way. I see the future consumer over the next 10 years to be a combination of the 4 I's. I think he'll be very well informed. I think he just has too much information at his table or at her table. I think the consumer will be very, very impatient. I think attention spans are dropping and they will drop even more. I think the consumer will be far more individualistic, a me, my situation. And I think the consumer will be far more intolerant. This is the type of consumer we're going to see this decade. Some we might like, some we might not like as marketeers, but this is the consumer we need to deal with. Next slide, please. So how does one reach out to this type of a consumer? I believe future brands will follow what I call the 6E approach. The 6 E's that we need to think about. In the past, we went with static models called IDA, awareness, interest, desire, action, things like that. I think that will change significantly. I think the first E is you need to excite consumers. You need to excite consumers whether they're buying your product or not. You need to excite them with information. You need to excite them with your concept, whatever it is. I think then once you excite them, you need to enlist them. You need to enlist them based on the emotions. They need to tap into you, to your product or service and say, hey, can I try this? And I think then you need to explain your stand. You need to explain your stand of philosophy on the product, on the ecosystem, and what you stand for in that society. Then you need to engage continuously with consumers. Engagement is not a one-off exercise where somebody buys your product or service and then you forget him or her. No, it is continuous and it's non-stop. You need to engage with him or her over 365 days. And you need to empower consumers to discover more about you. And the big difference today is that all consumers want experiences. In the past, we were in a physical world. The store was different. As long as the consumer decided to buy your soap or shampoo or mobile phone or whatever it is, he went to the shop. You didn't bother about the shop, how the shop looked or whatever it is. Today, the consumer, when he or she browses your site, wants a great experience, wants a frictionless experience. And then when the delivery happens, he wants it in the best possible manner, in the nicest possible way. So I think experience is becoming very important. This is even true about experience brands. If you talk about food, is a good example. You talk about rock bands, that will be a very good example. Every single thing, if you can build an experience around using time, using delivery, using any of these variables, I think that will add a completely new layer to marketing. And that was never our objective about 10, 15 years ago. My submission to you, price alone can never be exciting. There's always this temptation from marketers that let me go in with a low price, let me try and attract as many people as possible. You can get them once, but you need to continuously enlist, explain, engage, empower, and experience if you want to keep them. So price can be one approach to exciting people so that they can buy you once, but it cannot be always. Next slide, please. I believe advertising will move to being much more about information, giving much more about information, disclosing a lot more about your product, your stance, every single thing. I think ad blocking will be rampant. Across the world, in every single country, we see that. I think there'll be more technology which will come in. If you look at one of the makers of phones, Apple has already given you the option to block whomever you want on the phone. I think you'll see more and more of it. And hence, brands need to have permission in order to advertise, in order to communicate information. If brands need to have permission, then I go back to the first E, which I talked about, which is excite. If you don't excite consumers, they will block you, full stop. Next slide, please. I think visual stories will be at the heart of all communication. I remember I was on the council of Facebook a few years ago, I'm still am, and I pushed them a lot to get into videos. Instagram was a great example. And now if you look at stories from Facebook, stories from WhatsApp, whatever it is, they're huge. People want to communicate a story. If you look at your own LinkedIn post, you'll notice that every time you put a picture out there, it gets far more traction than just prose. So I think everybody is trying to tell a story. So visual stories will be at the heart of all communication in a future world. And I think one thing which people have forgotten, and I would seriously urge you to consider it, is ad music. I think music brings very different senses, very different reactions. I think a great visual story, packaged with lovely music, is going to be the art of storytelling in the future. Next slide, please. I think we'll see hyper-personalization. As a result of having a lot of data, I think people will tailor things for you. Sometimes it might shock you to say, oh my God, does this platform, does this brand know me so well that they can actually recommend what's next that I should be buying? So I think everything which involves some form of customization will get into hyper-personalization. Like the Stitch Fix. They have more than 3 million customers globally. I think clothes are stitched only for you. Gaming, the type of games you play, okay, on the mobile phone or on your laptop. Gaming is a very interesting thing. If you look at the 4 boxes, young, old, men, women, the 4 boxes split roughly equally in gaming. So people like certain genre of games and they will stick to it. And I think people will get hyper-personal in the way they talk to you about your gaming experience. I personally see that hyper-personalization will be the only route to actually add value. It's what I call differentiation or varianting at a degree of 1. Next slide, please. I think as a result of digital, you'll see different lines of business and different ways of driving revenue. I think you'll build a whole ecosystem. Today, with influencers, there are influencers who talk to people about what kind of healthy food they need to eat. If you're in the healthy food or snacks business, you need to tap into that. I think there are influencers who talk to people about what cream to apply, what eyeshadow to apply, etc. And there are influencers who charge to educate people. There are influencers who charge people in terms of public speaking. How do you make a presentation? Okay, how should you be answering questions in an interview, etc. So if you look at that whole value chain, there's going to be a lot of money to be made in the advice business in almost every single product or category. So I think looking at the whole pond, you need to ask yourself, what are the different lines of business? What are the different ways that I can drive revenue and profit for my brand? But remember one thing, you cannot do it alone. You have to partner. The days of independent growth are over. It is the days of dependent growth. You depend on a few people, they depend on you, and that's how you're going to grow. Next slide, please. Digital brands will always beat traditional company brands because their design thinking is significantly better. They target consumers better, they get feedback faster, and they act on it, and they're significantly better on sensory appeal. So if you look at mainstream brands, they try and appeal to as much of a mass as possible. And I think what digital brands will do is going one step ahead. What did mainstream brands do in the past? They would add a variant. They would say somebody plus, somebody premium, somebody gold, somebody silver, whatever it is. Okay, but it was still the basic product or the basic brand. I think digital brands have a huge advantage in actually going one peg up. I would say this decade, it's likely that digital brands will not overtake the traditional physical brands in size, but they will definitely be seen as better on design thinking, on engagement, and on sensory appeal. And traditional brands have to wake up to this challenge. Okay, and traditional companies can have their own, brands right into the digital channel, but it's your call, it's your challenge. Next slide, please. So, when I look at the marketer of 2030, what would I advocate to you? I think you have to target very, very well. You'll have all the data, you'll have all the insights, and that should help you target very, very sharply. Second, you have to be a very good user of the visual creative. It's going to be a very visual world. It's not going to be a prose world. Third, I think everything you do, you need to integrate commerce on the net. Whatever you put out, you need to tell consumers, there are 4 ways you can buy this product. There are 5 ways you can buy me. There are 6 ways you can do this, etc. And finally, you have to build relevance in every single interaction with the consumer. That's what you need to do. This is the type of marketer I believe will win in 2030. Excellent at targeting using data and insight, somebody who knows how to use visual very well, somebody who always is thinking not about just the message, but the sale. You have to combine the message and the sale, or the medium, the message and the sale. And finally, building relevance in every interaction. Next slide, please. So, in summary, I would say the consuming middle class is going to grow significantly. It's going to go to 5.4 billion people. Today, if you look at the top 750 cities in the world, they account for 57% of the global GDP. Okay. Going forward in 2030, they will account for 61%. The middle class is absolutely important for the growth of brands. Today, we have 500,000 brands in 2,000 categories. There are 3.6 billion phones available in the hands of people. Okay. Each of these phones has 600 GB as storage. People click a lot of pictures, 60% of them are shared. Online sales is booming. The benchmark for online sales in terms of innovation and what to do will be China. Because China, by 2024, will have something like 58% of their sales coming online. In the past, there was the notion that some categories will not go online, like grocery. But that's been disproven. As long as consumers have trust in the brand and the quality of the brand, they're happy to go with you. That's what I would say. I think you need to think very, very differently about the type of consumer you deal with and the type of experiences that you want to give him. I think digital brands have a natural advantage that they are much better targeted, much better in design thinking, much better in sensory appeal. So the traditional marketer will have to respond to that. So that's all I had to say, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time and listening to me. I'm sure that all the impact sessions will have a fantastic relevance for you, and I'm sure that you will benefit from it. Thank you and good day.